start importing American apparel. With the relatively low price in America and high demand in Japan, many businessmen jumped on the opportunity of importing these coveted pants. In 1957 alone, more than 400,000 jeans were imported into the country. Yet Japanese consumers did not purchase these imports. Many youths in Japan complained about the rigid nature of the jeans and preferred the pre-worn jeans found in army surplus stores. In fact, the army surplus jeans sold 10 to 1 to the new pairs imported from America. In reaction, jean importers bought out industrial washing centers and pre-washed their jeans. However, this additional cost meant that the imports were out of the price range for most youth. Importation, while alluring in industry, was less sensible in practice. As a result, many jean suppliers started importing raw, unprocessed denim from the mills in the southeast of the United States. New textile mills in Japan began producing Japanese jeans from American parts. Finally, Japanese jean supplier could keep up with the demand. As Japanese denim manufacturers started producing the first pair of domestic jeans, radical shifts were happening on college campuses in America. Just a few years after Kensuke Ishizu photographed campuses in Take Ivy, they exploded with activism and protests over the Vietnam War. While they were not directly impacted by the war or the psychedelic reunion, Japanese youths abandoned Ivy style and took inspiration from the new aesthetic languages that flourished in places such as San Francisco and Berkeley. They adopted light blue jeans and long hair, and even founded bands with names such as Underground Pop and LSD. At first, this shift in fashion was a wholly aesthetic movement. Japanese youths would don their hippie attire only on the weekends and wear more conservative clothing during the week. However, as disapproval ratings of Japanese government rose in response to increasingly unpopular agreements with the United States, the relatively docile hippies began to become more politically active. Denim-clad activists began barricading buildings at Tokyo University in protest of Japanese support of the United States' involvement in Vietnam. The hippies of Japan increasingly became more vocal about their distaste of American interference in politics. Ironically, they voiced these concerns while wearing the most American piece of clothing possible, jeans. As the hippie movement in Japan grew, some of the youth became radicalized. In the late 60s, students upset with the lack of action of the hippie movement began to form Marxist revolutionary groups focused on direct action. The most infamous of this group, the Red Army faction, founded by Fusako Shigenobu, probably just butchered that, were known by their characteristic denim-clad outfits. The Red Army conducted many notorious acts of terrorism, including Japanese flights and killing police officers. This caused a momentary dip in jean sales, as the association of the clothing went beyond simple anti-establishmentarianism to full radical violence. The peak of the radical student movement came in 1972, when 3 members of the Red Army slaughtered 26 civilians in an airport in Israel. Following these attacks, youth fervor declined, and less students associated themselves with radical groups. This coincided with the police crackdown on hippie and Marxist movements throughout the country. The dissipation of extreme cultural movements had a surprisingly positive effect on jean consumption in Japan. Now decoupled from the radical association, more consumers were willing to buy a pair of jeans. By 1973, 45 million pairs of jeans were being sold annually. Now, I don't know exactly what caused this boom. Perhaps it was the yen decoupling from the dollar, allowing Japanese youth to have a more disposable income, or maybe it was cultural shifts in the youth's view of the United States. Nonetheless, the denim market was flourishing. With a newly expanded market for jeans, Japanese suppliers sought to ramp up production and start producing jeans made wholly out of Japanese sourced material. This coincided with an order from the Nixon administration to cease textile exports. As Japanese textile mills relied almost entirely on American markets to sustain their business, they sought to shift their production to consumer fabrics that they could sell in their domestic markets. In the 70s and 80s, a whole host of Japanese textile mills began producing denim for Japanese jeans. Mills like Kurabo, Kaihara, and Kuroki started outputting enough denim that jean producers ceased importing American textiles. Along with advancements in sewing machines from Mitsubishi and locally produced zippers from YKK, the late 70s marked the first time that Japanese jeans were produced from wholly domestic materials. Meanwhile, in the United States, Levi's began cutting corners on their denim production. The removal of selvage lines, hidden rivets, and real leather patches dissuaded American consumers from buying American-made Japanese consumers. As historian David Marks writes, ordinary Japanese consumers knew little about the particular manufacturing processes, but sensed that modern jeans lacked the magic of the past. In an attempt to recapture this magic, Japanese jean manufacturers began experimenting with their production. Kurabo mills decreased their tension in order to produce more uneven denim that felt kind of textured like the feel of older jeans. Denim company Evisu started sourcing its cotton from Zimbabwe to recreate the durability of older Levi's. And brands such as Studio d'Artisan, Denim, and Warehouse reintroduced hidden rivets and other additions to make their jeans a little bit more original. During the last quarter of the 20th century, these companies became some of the most influential players in the denim world due to their devotion to the craft. Jean makers such as Evisu were able to land marketing contracts with American celebrities who a generation prior would only be seen in Levi's commercials. Evisu was even featured in a Jay-Z song where he proclaims, "And I breeze through, jeans is Evisu." In response to the new American fascination with Japanese denim, Levi's sued many Japanese companies for copyright infringement, seeking to ban their sale in the United States. In a 2007 decision, a federal court stated that in order for Japanese jeans to be sold in America, they must abide by the following rules. The rear pocket stitching must not resemble Levi's arcuate in any way, shape, or form. So on the right side here, we see the original domestic Japanese stitching, where they have the double arc. It's quite similar to the American Levi's arcs. But on the left, we see the international version to be sold in American markets. And they offset the arches a little bit so that they don't get sued for copyright infringement. Next slide. Some other manufacturers were a little bit more original with their way of introducing arcs. This is an Evisu pair where each pair is hand painted by the person who sewed the jeans. So they have like a very unique personalized style. And I even have a pair here from, this is a domestic jeans that one of my friends bought for me in Japan. So it does have a tab, but they do use these white painted marks to kind of differentiate themselves from Levi's jeans. Next. The court also said that the leather patch cannot show objects pulling apart jeans. On the left side, that's the original Japanese denim patch, which kind of like makes fun of the American Levi's patch, so instead of having two horses pull the jeans apart, you have two pigs. This one on the right is the replacement sold in American markets. I think it's really interesting that they chose Mount Fuji in the background, and how even though the jeans aren't really pulling anything, the slope of the mountain kind of connotes that same feeling from the Levi's patch. And next slide. So the final piece to allow Japanese jeans to be sold in America was that it had to remove any tabs on the side. So this is the back pocket of, I believe, a Warehouse pair of jeans. They have like this iconic skull and crossbones, but on their American version, they have this kind of cross. I think this is kind of interesting because in 2006 or 2008, this American denim brand, Imogene and Willie, started also having a cross on their jeans. I think possibly to imitate Japanese imports, but who knows? Yeah. And that kind of brings us to today. Last year, in 2017, Cone Mills, the last American denim mill, closed. While Japanese companies were perfecting the art of making the perfect jeans, we turned our back on the fabric that defines our country. I'm being a bit dramatic here, but there's something profoundly sad about the end of denim production in America. When I wear jeans, I feel connected to a long American history. Perhaps that's what made me feel so connected to them. As a brown child of undocumented immigrants growing up in post-9/11 New York, my jeans were a way of saying, I'm just as American as you. They were my own private rebellion against otherness, and also a way to blend into American society while still being able to differentiate myself. When Cone closed, it felt like the end of an era. I even got a tattoo to commemorate their closing. In some way, this marked the death of American denim, and I can't help but mourn the loss. As Americans, we no longer look to jeans with the same reverence that people in the past did. To most, jeans go unnoticed. They're the status quo. With places like Japan taking the reins and continuing the history of denim, I can't help but feel that the quintessential American fabric has lost its Americanness. In my research, I kind of struggle with this idea every day. I look at denim in the global context, and more I'm finding the way that we view denim as an American fabric is becoming muddled. There's huge denim cultures thriving in Western China, Indonesia, Thailand, Sweden, that bring their own cultural histories, mythologies into their production. I don't really have an answer if jeans are still American, if they're global, if they'll ever lose their true Americanness and become disassociated from their history. But, I'd like to hear your opinions and, maybe see if I can gain something from you. But this is my lecture, and I really thank you guys for listening. This is kind of like my passion. I've been studying this for around 7 years now, so it's really awesome to be able to get a podium and share with you guys. So thank you. Yeah. And I'm also ready for any questions if any of you have any.
Do you guys have any questions?
You mentioned at some point that Japanese denim material became produced domestically because Nixon had some sort of law. Do you know exactly why there was a ban on textile importation?
Yeah, so around the late 60s and early 70s, there was a lot of labor unrest in the American Southeast where most of the textiles were being produced for particularly consumer and kind of military use. So Nixon wanted to stop exports of textiles from other countries. So he didn't actually put a ban on textile exports from Japan, but strongly recommended against it because he would kind of make a retaliatory ban on or tariff on those exports at a later date.
Sounds sort of familiar to news today, the kind of threat of tariffs for steel and aluminum, and then, other countries are saying, we'll put a tariff on Levi's.
Yeah.
Literally. Go ahead.
Yeah, I think that's kind of funny. If you haven't heard, there was a news story yesterday where the EU threatened in retaliation to Trump's tariffs to put a tariff on bourbon, Harley Davidson, and Levi's, which I think is kind of funny. It's really hitting his base.
Did you finish answering Ana's question?
I think so, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, so I'm wondering how you feel about the introduction of non-traditional denim materials into jeans. I'm thinking of a pair of jeans Topshop released last year where they put plastic over the knees. And I'm wondering if you could talk about that introduction of experimental non-denim fabrics into denim.
I think the Topshop jeans you're talking about have the see-through plastic.
Yeah.
Okay, so I think those jeans are ridiculous.
And on aesthetic grounds, or what's the grounds of ridiculous?
On every ground possible.
Okay.
Functional, aesthetic, just spiritual. So that's kind of an interesting question for me personally. When I first started getting into jeans in high school and middle school, I was super obnoxious and pretentious about it. I'd be like, I only wear Japanese jeans and it has to be 100% cotton, and like the indigo has to be sourced from like this country and that country. So I was like fully in the realm of like jeans have to be their kind of original marker, their original like form. But kind of when I got to college, that kind of started changing. When I saw how other people wore their jeans at school, and how even if they weren't a pair of raw denim where like, for example, this is a pair where it was just like super dark, and I wore these to death and they faded. I saw that even if people weren't like kind of wearing jeans like me, denim became like a marker of their identity. Their jean jackets, like, even if they weren't made out of 100% cotton, they customized them in ways, and I gained like a better appreciation for denim that isn't like fully traditional. And even these jeans I wear today have a little bit of elastic in them, which is something like my 8th grade self would probably be like beating myself over the head for wearing. But I think it's a really interesting idea, just the permutations of jeans, and it's something I'm kind of like evolving with on a personal level. Yeah.
One interesting comment is that I remember learning about Levi's in like 6th grade in our history classes, so it really is somewhat historical and cultural element. Do you feel like they retained some of that sense of Americanness that you feel is missing today?
Yeah, it's. I think that now they're trying to reclaim that Americanness as part of their brand identity, in part due to such intense competition that comes in the denim markets in the 21st century. So while I focused on the lawsuit of Levi's against Japanese manufacturers, there was also lawsuits against American Eagle, Abercrombie & Fitch, and a few other denim producers. And I think part of that was that these kind of brands were pretty American. They were American companies, and Levi's wanted to reinstate itself as an original American brand. You also see they're coming out with collections like the LVC collection, Levi's Vintage Clothing, where they go in through their archives, they scour thrift stores around the country, and they recreate clothing from the past, trying to use original processes and materials. These are kind of outside the realm of the traditional consumers. Some of their jackets range up to like $2,500. So, not really kind of in my price range, but, I maybe one day I'll get there. So I think it's been a kind of weird shift where they moved away from it, and now are trying to reclaim it.
What do you guys think about that? I mean, because Ron kind of ended with this question about, well, has the American association with denim and jeans dissipated? I mean, the kind of history, it's something you learn in grade school. This is when Levi's are introducing jeans. It's this American workwear. And then they disseminate around the world, courtesy, at least in part, of GIs in World War II that have and are wearing jeans. And then, the example in Japan is happening in other places as well, that people see American soldiers wearing jeans. And even if you look at things like during the Cold War, the Soviets, trying to kind of send out propaganda that says America is terrible. You don't want to be like Americans, and showing propaganda films that incorporate, views of the inner city and see things are in disarray and poverty and awful, and people are watching it and saying, but they have jeans on. And so how bad can this be? Because jeans were a really expensive item and a coveted item in Soviet black market. So, there's this kind of strong association, I'm not going to take over, I promise, with America and jeans, but now it's this global thing. Does that Americanness, I was thinking about showing an image of, you're all too young, but maybe your parents have this album of Bruce Springsteen. Bruce Springsteen's Born in the USA. Okay, you all know what this looks like, where it's, the back. It's like I don't know, I feel like I decorated my locker with that at some point in my life. We'll go back to middle school for multiple people here. So this kind of association with America, but has that dissipated, and does that matter? Does it become then a kind of completely fluid form of clothing, global in its reach? What do you think? Yeah, Catherine.
So I have a question. So, like, the denim that Levi's uses to make jeans, like, where is that manufactured now? Is it in Japan or is it, like, developing countries?
Mostly developing countries. Well, I mean, developing countries is kind of they have a huge factory in Turkey, which I mean, we really wouldn't really consider developing, but also sources for Bangladesh and Southeast Asia. But what's pretty integral to know for answering that question is that Levi's uses different production and supply streams for if they're selling to different stores. So if Levi's is selling to Walmart, they will probably be using their lower quality denim and production streams that reach out of the southeast. While if they're selling to Macy's, they might be using like Turkish suppliers, and they actually have an office, or they had an office in Turkey until 2013. Not entirely sure if they still have some kind of corporate presence there, but they'll be using that for like Macy's, a little bit mid-tier brands, and for their LVC collection, collaborations with like Brooks Brothers or Supreme or other companies like that. That's a lot of that production is being done in America in their San Francisco-based factory, or it's kind of more of a workshop, and it was previously being done in South Carolina or North Carolina before the closing of the mills.
Why do you ask that question, Catherine, about where they're getting their cloth from?
Yeah, just because I was thinking, like, is denim still American? And, like, maybe it's the new American to, like, globalize, to have this, like, global production and distribution. It's, like, I mean, like, I just think that, like, American culture is still very influential around the world. And blue jeans are a big part of that. And maybe just because like people don't know that denim isn't made in America generally, and they still like associate it with America. So maybe like we don't have to let the details get in the way of the fact that that like jeans were still invented in America, and they probably do still have those associations.
So the symbolic value remains even as they're not products of America in terms of their fabric or their manufacture.
Or maybe like the fact that it's so global now is like a new American association.
Mm.
I'm trying to say like American culture is global, why shouldn't blue jeans be global?
Okay. Others? Yeah, Mary?
I feel like on a day-to-day basis, I don't think about like the association with America when I'm like picking out jeans or anything. But when I really associate it with America is on the 4th of July, when I like get around with my family and I distinctly like pick out a pair of blue jeans to be part of my outfit, and I feel like when I do that, I have this internal association with America that I'm not thinking about on a day-to-day basis. But when you think about it in like a patriotic way, or within the setting of like the 4th of July holiday, then I kind of think about, or I'm forced to think about the association of why I'm deciding to wear this certain clothing item on this specific day.
Mm-hmm. You mentioned this too, I think, which is so interesting that, you know, we think of jeans as this national and global phenomenon, but until the 1950s, Levi's wasn't selling jeans on the East Coast. That the only west of the Mississippi do you actually see Levi's in stores. I mean, people obviously knew about them, and people might well travel to the West and purchase them, and you know, there's other clothes that are made of denim, and so you know, you might say, okay, they're wearing jeans, but this kind of iconic brand, this iconic American brand, is actually a regional brand until a big region, but until the 1950s, which is I think really interesting if you think about kind of the focus of fashion on the East Coast, New York to Paris, what have you. Here's this other tradition or other history that gets taken up and becomes the dominant one.
Yeah, and like it is pretty late into the 50s when Levi's kind of fully penetrates the market, which I think is pretty interesting because kind of at that time it's like ramping up in popularity in Japan. So it might even be that Japan had like a denim market before the East Coast, which kind of also plays with our idea of Americanness, because this globalization isn't just happening in the present day, but it's happening almost on such a longer period that it's kind of mind-boggling.
When did Levi's start making women's jeans?
1926, I want to say, but their first pair of jeans weren't exactly like, they weren't sold as jeans. They were women's coverall dresses things. So like it was like this jacket with like a belt, and the jeans like came up here, but they were super loose and flowy. So it was more interacting with the kind of aesthetic characteristics of like just like 1920s high fashion, or maybe not even high fashion, but like part of like kind of that fashion culture when they're marketing towards women. And you really see like the 501 is marketed kind of in the 50s and 60s as just kind of like every person fan. Partially because the 501 is made out of untrunking cotton, so most jeans you buy in stores today have like, you know, if you put them in the wash, they just are the same size. And back in the day, like they would shrink when you wash them, so like there wasn't really that much of a need to tailor different fits to different body types. You would soak them, shrink them. Some people would sit in the bathtub with them and then like get out and let them dry, because then the fabric shrinks right to their legs. So there wasn't as much of a need for differentiating women's jeans from men's jeans. You see that happening a little bit later on when they start switching to sanforized denim, which is the unshrunken one.
I mean, we saw this a little bit in the women. You know, by the 1930s, there's this kind of fad for the dude ranch as a vacation destination. So if you actually have the means to kind of take, in the 30s during the Depression, to go take on vacation, a dude ranch was a popular. And there, you know, that association with cowboys and westerns gets kind of underscored as, yeah, if you're going to go out and be riding horses, then you need jeans. Not necessarily Levi's, but although you're right, they had Levi's at that point. But
Yeah,
That
it was.
for women too.
yeah, so because that's 1939 is the women. So by 20s, yeah, and I think I saw there's like Lady Levi's in Vogue in like 1935, but they aren't for sale on the East Coast. So it's just this kind of like, if you happen to go on your dude ranch vacation, you might want to pick up a pair of Levi's. And people didn't wear them when they were home. It was then, you know, they wore them on their dude ranch vacation. Then they came home, put those in their trunk or whatever, and then took them back out for their next dude ranch trip. It wasn't something that people were putting on
Yeah, and also
day-to-day until later.
yeah, there's Wrangler and Lee that are coming out in this time period too. I'm more familiar with Levi's, so I can't really speak to those kind of things.
What do you think about like different cuts of denim and like who or what dictates it?
Could you elaborate more on that question?
Yeah, like, you know, like, I guess like 10 years ago, like skinny jeans was like so in, and now it's like not, like there are more variety now, but I feel like it's all like, I mean, like who gets to decide like what cut is in, like what cut is not?
I think it's been a while since I took this class. I think there's a reading that kind of talks about how at like the top of fashion, there's like these people who are trying to react against the cultural norms and how that dissipates down. And I think that's kind of true for denim. Not in the sense that like the denim companies are like, let's change this, but that the whole visual and aesthetic culture shifts over time to kind of become a reaction of what came previously. And then that like manufacturers respond to those aesthetic shifts by producing new jeans for those markets. That's my personal opinion. I haven't like kind of studied the changes in cuts that much, but that's how it looks to me.
I think it's also, you know, this circles back to some of the questions about like what about the qualities of denim are essential, and you're kind of, we'll use the word fetishizing of older denim, and like it has to be cotton and it can't have any spandex or any kind of, I mean, but now, I mean, skinny jeans are in part possible because of the integration of different types of material into the fabric of denim, so that, you know, they hold their shape instead of changing over time and, you know, and stretching out totally. So some of those kind of technological possibilities of this is how we're making fabric, this is the kind of thing as well kind of contribute there. Plus they want to encourage different sales, so introduce a new cut, and people need those. You need high-waisted pants, what have you.
Yeah, and there was actually skinny jeans even in like kind of the 40s and stuff, and I have like, this is kind of like a reproduction, it's a kind of reimagining of skinny jeans from like the mid 20th century, and these are like uncomfortable when I got them. They're like cardboard, so kind of the addition of the things is like a really like a much more of a comfort thing too.
Mm-hmm, mm-hmm. What about, well, do you guys have other questions?
Yeah, what do you think the biggest failure in denim has been in recent years?
Definitely